and welcome back to the workshop. In today's episode, we're going to be finishing off the world's nicest marshmallow roasting fork. Now, if you haven't seen part one, where I forged out the Damascus, and then forged the fork, and then heat treated it, you should probably watch that before we get into this, unless you don't like forging and you only like hand sanding. Which, if you're into that, I will pray for you. But for those of you that have seen part one, let's jump right on in. Just kidding. Let's talk about Squarespace. Squarespace is today's sponsor. They are an online website building platform that is just fantastic. Isaiah can attest. Isaiah was able to, in a very short amount of time, build a beautifully laid out website, not because he is a web designer, but because he was using Squarespace. They have galleries, contact pages. It's very easy to sell products and link your social media. You can even have members-only areas. And it's all simple and easy to use, even if you are not a tech genius. I've been using Squarespace for a couple years now, and I very highly recommend it. I actually started using Squarespace because Alec was sponsored by them way back in the day, and I said, hey, that looks pretty neat. I think I'll build myself a website. And so I think it's very important that if you're passionate about something, if you want to be able to present information in a professional looking manner, a website is the way to do it. If you guys are interested in checking out Squarespace, go to squarespace.com and use code WillStelter at checkout for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a website domain. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring today's episode. With that, let's jump right on in to getting this thing cleaned up. Right now, it's all as forged, and it needs to be not that way. For the first stage of grinding on a project like this, I basically just want to get down into clean material, getting the forge scale off, or at least really close to it, so I can lay out more precise layout lines. I'm using a rough, worn out 60 grit belt to rip off that forge scale, because if I used a new belt, it would destroy it immediately. Done it. All right, so here I am laying out the center lines and basically the lines to help make sure that this thing is straight. However, so all this looks good, the whole upper part of it looks good, but the pommel itself is canted at a little bit of an angle. So what I'm gonna do is heat up a portion of the tang closer to the guard, and I'm gonna forge that pommel over just a tiny, tiny bit, and that will allow me to keep a little bit more width both in the guard and in the pommel. Otherwise, I'd have to remove it down just on the south side of where I'd like it to be. I want it to be a little bit wider than what it would allow if I just started grinding with it from where it's at. Yeah, that's way better. Well, with the majority of the rough grinding done, I'm now able to move on to using hand files and sandpaper as well as burrs and my micromotor to get everything cleaned up. Since I tempered this thing at 700 degrees, it's in the low 50s Rockwell, which means that it's still hard, but it's just barely soft enough that I can use hand files on it. That'll make cutting all of the facets and doing all the transitions a lot easier.
Hello. YouTube video bombing, and he won't know ever.
Okay, so now that I've got it roughed into my scribe lines there, the top is looking good. I'm gonna go ahead and start hand filing on here. I also picked up some diamond files. Those are these fellas right here. They've got a little diamond grit on them. You can kind of rub them back and forth, almost like sandpaper, but they cut hardened steel, so they cut this quite well. So I'll be switching between my normal needle files and these guys and get all those lines smoothed in. I'm not going to do a facet along the bottom here. I'm just gonna have it be rounded. So the facet and the way that it mirrors the top of the fork will only be on the top of the guard. The bottom will just be rounded. For comfort, that's where your hand is gonna interact with it, and so I want it to be rounded and comfortable. Oh my gosh, this whole time I haven't been thinking about the fact that my knife vise would work just fine for this. Well, our fork guard is looking awesome. We have our little forks in there. We have some very nice lines. I'm really liking how this is looking. So the next step is going to be going and working on the pommel itself. Now the pommel's cross section is going to look very similar to the cross section at the end of the guard. There'll be a centerline facet running down it, and then a slightly rounded out edges, which will give us kind of a hexagonal oval type deal. Start off with a 120 grit belt, and then move on to 220, and then eventually 400 before coming back out to do a bit of hand sanding. Well, the Marshmallow fork is looking unbelievable. We've got our nice sharp points there. It actually got me pretty good on this finger. We've got our little mini forks are looking good as well, and then we've got our facets on the top and bottom here. I actually went back in with a smaller burr and kind of tightened up that radius leading into the handle material. I think I have a little bit more grinding to do on the tang, not a whole lot before it's ready for handle. The next step is going to be fitting up our pieces of mammoth. I'm going to be angling the front and back side of the fits so that I have a little bit extra wiggle room. If I were to just kind of try and straight cut fit it, I would have no room for error. But if I have an angle on the top and bottom, that'll allow me to take material off of the flat side here and kind of have a little bit more room. That being said, this is still going to be an extremely difficult, very, very little room to mess up type of deal. And so I'm going to go real slow. I'm going to be using the soot from a candle flame to cover my area that I'm going to be working on. And that will basically allow me to transfer the areas that are contacting from the fork and the tang and the pommel onto my mammoth ivory. Thankfully, mammoth is a very carvable, very easy to work with material, nice and soft. You can scrape it, you can file it, you can sand it. It does all of that very well. So with that, I've got it very roughly fit up. It's like in the neighborhood of being fit. But this scale is currently about as thick as the whole guard and pommel on the Marshmallow roaster, so we need to thin it down. I do want it to stand out proud a little bit because I want to have a fairly aggressive kind of overflow heirloom fit into it. I do not want it to be flush. These would be super thin at that point. I'd lose some of the color, and I don't want that. I want these to have a bit of a aggressive heirloom fit into the guard transition. So I'm going to take off about 150 thousandths of an inch going all the way around. So I'm going to do that starting off with a 60 grit belt on the belt sander and then moving on to a 120 and then back onto the 220 grit on the disc to get it completely finished out. It's currently 1 a.m. I'm going to try and get the other one done tonight before I go to bed. I gave myself some wiggle room here. It's sunk down probably 50 thousandths of an inch or so. I've got my slot for the tang. I have half of the tang's thickness carved out on this end, and then it kind of tapers out on this side. So next step is to take the bandsaw and cut out very roughly the area on this side and start fitting it up. Now that I have a reference area, the top can't really move at all since it's got a nice fit, and so it should make the process of fitting basically going like that and checking using the soot and very slowly sneaking in on getting that backside fit. Well, after about 12-ish hours of fitting up, it is mostly there. There's still a little bit of gap, but I've also noticed that the mammoth ivory is still moving a little bit because I've ground into it. Different stresses have been relieved, and so the ivory is moving. That being said, it should settle down, and now that I'm this close, should settle down a little bit, but I'm also a little bit worried that as I profile it, that'll change the stresses in there a little bit as well, and so I'm not going to get it 100% yet. It is within a couple thousandths of an inch. It's probably within 4 or 5 thou. So just a little bit of tune-up, nothing big. But now it is time to profile my scales. I've got a paper pattern that I made, and I just made it symmetrical by folding it in half and cutting it out. And I'll trace it onto side A, profile side A, and then trace that onto side B, and then go in and kind of get everything all sorted out once it's all the way together. And then from there, we will talk about how we're gonna get this thing stuck together and what else we're going to be doing to the handle, because I decided to make this more complicated. Well, it's next morning now. It looks like the mammoth moved a little bit, but not really a whole lot. Nothing that I'm gonna be super duper worried about, because I still have the rest of that fit up work to do. The plan now is to drill a couple holes in the B side scale, 1/8 inch pinholes. I'll then cut up a couple of little short pieces of this 1/8 inch stock, and from there, I'm gonna make indexing pins. So I'll have 8 indexing pins that should keep this thing super duper solid. It won't be able to move around at all, and it should make the process of fitting these guys up a lot smoother. All right, so I wasn't able to get all 4 pins, or all 8 pins in there. I got 4 in, and it is a snappy, tight fit with just 4, especially around the tang. But right now that means that since I have 4 pins, it means that I can work on this handle off or on the mallow roaster. So that is a very nice part about having indexing pins. What I'm gonna do right now, however, is do kind of a bedded tang type thing on this. I'm going to coat all of this in paste wax, coat the whole tang, basically everything is gonna get coated in paste wax. And then I'm gonna fill it up with epoxy. Alrighty, it looks like our glue up was successful. It definitely, there's glue in there. Good stuff. Now we can move on to a little bit more serious shaping. It's still a little bit on the wide side. We're gonna pop this thing apart just to make sure that we can get it apart, and then we'll go back and start doing a little bit more intentional shaping of everything, starting to getting things rounded out and whatnot. Now that I've got the handle glued up, it is looking fantastic. I'll be able to, now that it indexes a little bit tighter even, and it should hopefully go back in the exact same way that it came apart, we will start shaping the handle a little bit more. It needs to slim down a touch. I think I'm gonna bring down these ridges here just a little thinner, and then we can get onto a little bit more of the rounding things out, a little bit more of the like final fit. Make sure that everything up here is looking good, that it's gonna fit together nice and tight how I want it. And then I'm actually gonna add a little bit of carving into the handle. Now, the pattern for the carving just kind of mimics the shape of these swept lines transitioning from the pommel and the guard on inward, and it'll go through the bark and kind of expose that creamy core down below. So I'll have toasted marshmallow, very pillowy looking carving into the creaminess at the bottom of where we will be carving into. So with that, let's hop on into the grinding room and start with a little bit of shaping. So for this carving, I'm going to start off doing the center line. I'm going to do this center line pretty light. I'm not going to go in super deep from the get-go on it, because where the center of this handle is, the center line for it might change a little bit as I kind of change the relief carving around the front or the top and the bottom of the handle. So I'm not going to go super deep with it. Alrighty, well that carving went overall pretty well. I used the micromotor more than I have in the past on this. I found that I was able to cut my lines in with it a little bit easier than using hand files, especially in the areas where it kind of wanted to flow into that center line. And then I was able to clean it up later with sandpaper and files. Right now it's at 1,000 grit. I'm gonna finish it off at 2,000, then I'll buff it, and then it should be ready to rock and roll. Next step is to etch my maker's mark on here, and then we'll do our final cleanup to get it ready for etching. Okay, you guys will have to forgive the extreme level of jankiness of this etching setup, but this tool tray from a little portable toolbox is about the only plastic container that I have that will fit the fork. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour my etching in here. Golly, I hope I have enough. Alrighty, I think we're done etching. I've got some baking soda water down here. Oh yeah, that is downright purty. From here, I'll give it a quick scrub off and then throw it in some instant coffee to blacken it up a little bit more. Alrighty, it looks like we've got ourselves an etch on here. I'm gonna pull it out, wash it off in my baking soda water, give it a rinse off in the sink, and then oil it down. And if I have to clean off any oxides from the 15 and 20, I'll do that with a 8,000 grit micro mesh, and then it'll be donezo. Goodness gracious me. I dare say that looks pretty good. Oh my gosh. And now I'm going to do something that I did on one other piece that I think would go well on this, and that is I'm going to heat it up with a heat gun and then put some carnauba-based wax on it. This stuff dries hard, and so that provides an awesome layer of protection, and it should really help that Damascus to pop. I don't really have a great process for this yet. You got to get it warm, otherwise the carnauba wax doesn't really melt. I'll also mention that it's a food-safe wax, and so it's a great choice for this application. Don't want any nasty waxes getting on yo schmallows. Go to war. Ugh. Fun fact about this marshmallow roasting fork is that if you were to stab someone with it, not only would it be a normal crime, it would also be a war crime, because these are tri-edged blades and they are illegal under the Geneva Convention. So if you're into war crimes, boy have I got the marshmallow roasting fork for you. All joking aside, this thing is donezo. I am just absolutely thrilled to have finally finished it. I won't lie to you guys. This is one of the projects where at the very end I was like, can I just get this thing over with? Which, it does happen from time to time. It doesn't happen all the time. Generally on kind of the longer builds, you start off very excited about it. You're doing the forging. That's very exciting. And then you just kind of get less and less and less excited about it because you have so many different things to do on it. Generally, my spirit gets broken during the etching process, which on this looked like it was like oh, we just did it. I tricked you guys. It took me a very long time to etch this thing. I think it was a problem with my coffee, but at the end of the day, I finally did get a very nice etch on it, and I'm very happy about that. So now that it is finished, I am very happy. I love the pattern and how it came out, the way that you can see how the twist of the steel works in kind of the stem area is just lovely. I love that you can see how aggressive the pattern flow is from having forged everything so closely to shape. The fact that the guard lugs are very thin, tight pattern from the outside of the twist because I cut them open and bent it out. I think that is super cool. I love the way that the pattern flows from the guard into the pommel. You can really tell that it's one piece of steel. I'm really happy with the carving. It gives it a really nice texture and grip, and it kind of exposes a little bit more of the layers of the mammoth ivory. And despite the fact that this fit up took me overall about 16 hours to do, I'm happy with my fit ups here. So overall, I'm thrilled to have had the opportunity to build the world's nicest marshmallow roasting fork. This piece will be available for sale at Blade Show in Atlanta, table 36A. I'm having a box made for it by a local friend of mine, which I leave in 14 hours for Atlanta. I still have 2 more knives to finish, actually. But if you guys are gonna be at the show, come by, say hi, swing the marshmallow roasting fork around, commit some war crimes, maybe buy it if you want, up to you. If you guys enjoyed this type of build, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know some of the things that you guys would like to see the world's nicest version built of down in the comments down below. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring today's episode. Thank you to our patrons for patronizing us. And with that, I will see you guys on the next one. This is Will Stelter, and you're watching my YouTube channel.